And let's start off with volcanoes. So volcanic eruptions are when we have molten rock erupting at the Earth's surface, right? So remember, molten rock is just melty rock, right? Liquid rocks. And if it's under the ground, we call it magma. And if it's above ground, we call it lava. And then we also need to consider something called viscosity, which the fancy definition of viscosity is the tendency within a body to resist flow. Basically, it is a measure of how sticky a substance is, particularly a liquid. And so if you have a higher viscosity, that means that your magma or your liquid is more sticky. It is resisting flow more. And so a good example of viscosity is if you have let's compare water and syrup, right? Water is less viscous, it flows really easily. Syrup has a higher viscosity, it's more sticky, right? It flows more slowly. So the viscosity of molten rock depends on 4 things: temperature, composition, and the amount of dissolved gases. Okay. Hey everyone, so today's lecture is about geologic hazards, and specifically we'll be talking about volcanoes and earthquakes. So let's start off with volcanoes. Remember, volcanic eruptions have a source material, and that source material is molten rock. So our igneous rocks are forming from these volcanic eruptions or from volcanic environments if we have extrusive igneous rocks, right? So remember, molten rock, once it hits the Earth's surface, we call it lava. And so volcanic eruptions are dealing with lava. And then when we're thinking about volcanoes, we also have to consider the viscosity of that lava. And the viscosity is the tendency within a body to resist flow. That's the fancy definition. And that means that when we have high viscosity, the liquid, the magma, the lava is stickier. And so a good example is if we compare water and syrup. Water has a low viscosity, it flows really easily. Syrup has a higher tendency to resist flow, it's stickier, and so it has a higher viscosity. And the molten rock viscosity, right? So the viscosity of a magma or of a lava depends on the temperature of that molten rock, the composition of that molten rock, and the amount of dissolved gases within that molten rock. So with temperature, as we increase temperature, we decrease the viscosity. If we have hotter magma, then we have a magma or a lava that likes to flow more easily, right? It's more watered down, it's liquidier, it likes to flow easily. And as we decrease the temperature, we increase the viscosity, right? It's not going to flow as easily when the temperature is lower. So for example, if anybody puts their syrup in the microwave, right, and heats it up a little bit, when you increase the temperature of your syrup, you decrease the viscosity of it, and so it's easier to pour on your pancakes. So the composition of the molten rock is also important to determining viscosity. When you have higher amounts of silica in our molten rock, then we have higher viscosity. So higher amounts of silica, remember, those are our felsic lighter colored minerals that we see in our igneous rocks. Basically, silica makes really long chains, and all those chains, as they're in this liquid, get stuck together and make the liquid stickier, right? So higher amounts of silica means long chains that get stuck together, which increases the viscosity, right? It's a stickier magma when you have higher silica. So when we have our darker colored igneous rocks, our mafic rocks, like basalt, they only have about 50% silica, and felsic rocks, like granite, have more than 70% silica. So basaltic lava flows much farther and faster than granitic lava. And then as we increase the amount of gaseous water in our molten rock, we actually decrease the viscosity. So as you increase the amount of gas in your magma, you're going to make it flow more readily, right? Less sticky, more flowy. And that's because that gaseous water actually helps to break apart those silica chains, which are increasing viscosity. Right, so with temperature, if you increase temperature, you decrease viscosity. If you increase silica, you increase viscosity. And if you increase gaseous water, you decrease viscosity. We have two different types of volcanic eruptions. We have quiescent eruptions and explosive eruptions. I also sometimes call quiescent eruptions quiet eruptions because it's just an easier word to say and remember. So our quiescent eruptions deal with low viscosity magma. So our more basaltic lava, our mafic lava, our darker colored lava with less silica. And our explosive eruptions have higher viscosity magma, or those more silica rich molten materials with the long silica bonds that increase the viscosity. So with our quiescent eruptions, because we have low viscosity magma that's pretty liquidy, right? The gas is easily able to escape because you have this liquidy, easy to flow lava. But in higher viscosity magma, the gases get trapped and they remain dissolved because they cannot readily escape because it's more of a sticky liquid. So when we have eruptions with quiescent volcanoes, the eruption column can get to about 300 feet tall in the form of what we call lava fountains, which you can see in this picture down here a little bit of some lava fountains. But explosive eruptions have huge eruption columns up to 25 miles in height, right? So our explosive eruptions are these sort of classic ones that we are intrigued by when we are kids. But with our quiescent eruptions, we have eruptions that are lasting for weeks or even years. And with our explosive eruptions, it's much more shorter lived, right? So you might have a series of explosions over a short time period, and then that volcano is dormant for a really long time. So an example of a quiescent eruption is the Kilauea volcano in Hawaii. So the Hawaiian volcanoes are a quiescent eruption with low viscosity magma and lots of lava flows that have been flowing for weeks to years. And then an example in recent history of an explosive eruption would be Mount St. Helens in Washington State. All right, so volcanoes can also extrude different material, right? They erupt and create different material during these eruptions. So they spit out, right? Extrude, spit out lava, gas, and what we call pyroclastic material. So lava flows are one of the things that volcanoes extrude. And there's two different types of lava flows. We have fluid basalt lavas. Again, these are our lower viscosity lavas, our basaltic fluid lavas. And then we have higher viscosity rhyolitic lavas. Right, so our fluid basalt lavas can flow anywhere between 30 to 1,000 feet per hour. So this isn't to say, I mean, that's pretty fast, right? Like this can destroy houses and things, and maybe not want to be like taking a nap by a fluid basalt lava flow. And then our viscous rhyolitic lavas have movement so slow you can't even perceive it. And these lavas at the most can only travel a few miles away from their vents. With our basaltic lava flows, we have two types of flows. We have AA, which has a rough and jagged surface. Right, so you can see how rough and jaggedy the surface of this lava flow is. And then we have a flow called pahoehoe, which is smooth or ropey. Right, so here's a pahoehoe lava flow. And the joke we always learned when I was going through school is if you walked on this barefoot, if you stepped on an it's rough and jaggedy, so you'd say ah. So that's the way to remember the difference between the two types of basaltic lava flows. And pahoehoe is a little hotter than so you can actually have a pahoehoe lava flow that then cools off and turns into an lava flow. All right, so magmas have something called volatiles, which are just dissolved gases held within that magma due to the weight of the earth on top of that magma. And this can make up to 6% of the entire weight of that magma. And most of it's water vapor. And these volatiles from volcanic eruptions can last in the atmosphere for years. Right, so all of this steam that you see coming off from volcanic eruptions is these volatiles that are no longer held by pressure, so they erupt, right? So think of like in your can of Coke that all that carbon dioxide is held under confining pressure, and then you pop the lid and the carbon dioxide starts to fizz out, and that's what makes it, carbonated. Same thing happens with magma, where it's under pressure and then that pressure is released during the volcanic eruption and those gases are able to escape. All right, and then the third thing that volcanoes extrude are pyroclastic materials. And we also call pyroclastic materials tephra, which is just lava and glass fragments that have hardened. And this is usually during energetic eruptions, right? Our explosive eruptions, this is when we are creating pyroclastic or materials or tephra. And there are three different sizes of pyroclastic materials. Ash is powdery, and we get this when we have gas-rich, really viscous lava eruptions. And ash is dangerous. You don't want to inhale ash because it's essentially glass shards. Rapilli are peat walnut-sized material, right, produced during explosive eruptions. And then blocks and bombs are much larger, apple to refrigerator sized material that's extruded from an energetic volcano. And blocks are just pieces of hardened lava that has cooled mid-air during this eruption. And then bombs are streamlined, right? So as they're flying through the air, they get streamlined a little bit. They kind of turn into these little bomb-shaped pieces of rock. So they're like super cool because they cool very quickly during the explosive eruption as they're flying through the air. All right, so when we're thinking about volcanoes, we have three different classifications of volcanoes. We have shield, composite, and cinder cone. And the way that a volcano looks, the side view of a volcano, is a function of magma composition. So going back to that viscosity, right? What the magma is made up, how viscous it is, creates these three different types of volcanoes. So first, let's talk about shield volcanoes. And shield volcanoes are named because they look a bit like a warrior shield if you look at them from the side. Right, so they have this broad, slightly domed shape. You can see someone standing on Mauna Kea, which is a shield volcano. Here are the Galapagos Islands, which are volcanic islands from space. Shield volcanoes are made up of low viscosity, or you can think of them as that more fluid basaltic lava. Because it's low viscosity and more fluid, it can travel really far and really fast from the vent. And then you can also get hardening of the outside of the lava flow, but it's still melty inside. And so that liquid part inside can travel far, being protected from the air by the hardened outer part. And that's what we call lava tubes, right? So you can make these really long tubes of hardened stuff on top, but liquid stuff inside, right? Like even like a little, kind of like a little straw out from the main vent of the volcano. And so this basalt can travel miles and miles. And there's usually a large steep-walled caldera at the summit or at the middle of the volcano. So you can see these calderas here in this Galapagos Islands picture. And so two really good examples of shield volcanoes are the Galapagos Islands and the Hawaiian Islands. The second type of volcano are the smallest, and they are cinder cones. And cinder cones are built from ejected lava fragments. This is more of a single eruptive event of lava that gets ejected and cools into pyroclastic material. And that pyroclastic material builds up around the place of eruption, but it doesn't stick together very well. And so lava doesn't flow from the top of it like you would normally think of a volcano. Instead, it flows from an unconsolidated base, right? So these cinder cones are made up of just pieces of pyroclastic material that aren't stuck together. And so the lava can't flow from the top, it has to flow from the bottom. They have really steep sides. And so what that means is that they look really interesting on the landscape when you see them, because they look kind of unnatural because they have these really steep sides. They're relatively small and they commonly occur in groups. And the best example of cinder cones are in Piracutin in Mexico, which basically these eruptions popped up. We had this sort of single eruptive event that took over the town, and this town, and like lava flowed all over the town, destroyed everything in the town, and then it hasn't been active since that one eruptive event. And then the third type of volcano are composite volcanoes, or they're also known as stratovolcanoes. And these are the ones that are like your classic volcano, right? So thinking about when you used to make volcano models as a kid, and when you see volcanoes in movies, commonly they are composite volcanoes. And these have a large cone shape, and the cone is actually built up of layers of ash and other types of tephra, and then lava, right? So it's kind of like layered, like a layer cake, a lava flow, and then an ash layer, and then a lava flow, and then an ash layer. And some examples are Mount Vesuvius, Fiji, Rainier, so sort of those big classic looming volcanoes that have these really explosive eruptions. through time and then are dormant for a really long time are composite volcanoes.